Our webinar topic for this month is talking about having tough conversations. It's something that as humans, and particularly as New Zealanders, we tend to shy away from. It isn't often our preferred space to be in. And it's something that's particularly an issue in the transport and logistics space. The clients that we work with, they have drivers out on the road, so that some conversations can't happen face to face. But also, I would say this is actually a topic for everyone to brush up on. What are some of the techniques for having those tough conversations? If you've just joined us today or you're new to Success Formula, my name's Kelly McCluckey. I'm joined today by special co-star, Jenny Ross-Janet, also from Success Formula. And like me, Jenny's worked in the transport and logistics space for quite a number of years. So we're going to have a bit of a conversation backwards and forwards and draw on some of that experience today and having a chat about this topic. If you are interested in any of the other webinar topics that we've recorded previously, all about people and culture and those types of issues that are particularly topical in transport and logistics, you can find those on our website, but we also record and publish them on Spotify and on YouTube as well. And we can send or you'll find those on LinkedIn, probably the best way to do it. Okay, so Jenny, first of all,
Kelly, before we just jump in as well to the actual topic, I just also want to highlight that I've had experience in owning businesses and in a leadership role as well, and not just in a consultancy space. So come from first-hand experience and first-hand examples, because there's one thing to talk about stuff in theory and another thing in practice, the reality of it all. So have had quite extensive experience in actually dealing with reports too.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jenny, that's probably a good lead on. How, in your own words, or like from your perspective, how do you define a tough talk or a difficult conversation? What even is this topic?
So it's a good thing to do the definition, and potentially almost today I thought about saying what we're not talking about, because certainly what we're not going to talk about are those difficult conversations that potentially could lead to somebody being instantly dismissed. So anything that would be in a person's contract, or that would require instant dismissal, theft, mishandling of equipment deliberately or something like that. Yeah. That's not what we're talking about here, right? That requires HR, legal specialists. And I would say to any business owner to default to that immediately. If there was some serious bullying going on, you want to call in the experts. Today, what we're talking about is people not following procedures, maybe differences of opinions in meetings, that sort of thing, where the principles about how you approach that are very similar. And I'm going to think that we'll be talking more about the people that just don't follow SOPs and procedures and processes that you have in place. How do you get them? Because just having the procedure is not a given, but somebody's going to follow them. And what do you do then, right?
So I guess you could say any conversation where there's a potential outcome of conflict, where there might be a difference of opinion,
perspective,
or where there's some kind of reprimand, or having to set people straight or kind of put them on a different path, for sure. Yeah. And look, I think the reason that a lot of Kiwis shy away from having tough conversations is, as human beings, we don't generally like conflict. And I would say we're, as a species, kind of programmed to want people to like us. And I think Kiwis in particular struggle with sitting down and having a difficult conversation, addressing a topic, if they think there's a potential for conflict. I mean, coming from an international background, is that something you would agree with?
I think people are people, right? And we probably see that all over the world, where there's some people that don't mind so much and some people that do shy away from it. At the end of the day, it's stressful. When you're going to go in to have a conversation, it's stressful. And You want to stay on task, you want to do what you need to do, and you really don't want to have those stressful conversations. And I do think, Kelly, that a lot of us aren't trained as to how. When, you know, we are experts, we're technical experts. I mean, I actually started my life as a teacher, and the only way to progress is to become a principal or headmistress. And so, but I'm taught to be a teacher. I'm not taught to be a principal leading people. A person driving a truck, a professional driver, is not taught how to be the ops manager or the GM, and then finds himself in that position and hasn't had any training or not. I mean, some do, some people do, but the majority of us don't. I was never, ever given, you know, formal leadership training. I had to seek that out myself. Yeah, so I think one of the things is just knowing how.
And I think that's not just drivers, but most people in transport that we've worked with have not had formal training, leadership training, management training, you know, around communication skills, etc. So, you know, hopefully this topic is helpful for those on the call, but also it's something that we consistently get feedback on in the traction surveys that we run, where we get staff feedback on how things are going in the company. And a recurrent theme is we need to improve communication, you know, issues don't get addressed, and that causes more problems, etc. So, you know, there are a lot of challenges around having these difficult conversations, as you pointed out, lack of training, it's stressful, we're not programmed to do it. But what would be some of the impacts from your experience if we don't address issues or problems? What's the fallout of that?
Well, as you and I know, if we let the behavior go by that is not correct, then it becomes the standard. It becomes the way we do business. Instead of addressing it with one or two staff members, you now have to address it with multiple. Okay? The other fallout of that all is also just rework and damage and things. I ask leaders if they could actually itemize how many times they have to go and follow up on process or procedures that have not been done by their staff. And I remember a GM in Auckland sharing with me how he worked it out, that it was at least half a day every week following up on paperwork from staff at the front line not fulfilling the requirements of their job, you know, say doing their pre-vehicle check, for example. And in one instance, we worked out what it cost him, both financially, but also in time. If the guy doesn't do his pre-vehicle check, he gets halfway at night from Auckland to Wellington and finds the lights of the vehicle are not working. So he has to stop. We have to guess at 6 o'clock, there has to be a call out of a mechanic. If that pre-vehicle check had been done and process followed, that wouldn't have happened. So the cost of variety of costs, time, getting mechanic after hours, and then the cost of not delivering on time, not giving a good customer service. So that's just one example. If we don't nip the behaviors we don't want in time and upfront, it's going to cost the business a lot of rework.
I think that's a good example where, you know, a small issue snowballed into becoming a bigger issue. I think also it's worth calling out the impact on other people, because, you know, where, let's say, in using that example again, the other staff, you know, the other drivers say, oh, well, so-and-so gets away with not doing his pre-vehicle check, so why should I bother? And the standard starts to come down. Or, hey, you know, why isn't that person getting called out on that bad behavior? And you know, and maybe I'm doing the right thing, they're not doing the right thing, they're not getting called out on it, and that starts to build a bit of resentment potentially. So yeah.
And Kelly, you and I know we have surveyed well over 6,000 staff in the transport industry over the last, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years, right?
Oh, I'd say probably double that now these days.
Yeah. And there, the industry benchmark and this is shown that people not taking accountability is one of the biggest issues. It's across all the different freight tasks and across the industry. And what I read from feedback from the frontline guys is, why can't our leaders hold individuals accountable? We want them to. We want to be working in a company where everybody is high performing. And the greatest risk that companies do expose themselves to is staff leaving. Because your good staff go, I don't want to work at a company which is almost kind of third world. They put the rules in place, but nobody gets any, has any tough conversations with anyone. And now we're working up substandard. So one of the biggest risks, besides all the health and safety risks, is your good staff leave.
And isn't that ironic when, well, certainly I hear a lot of transport people saying, oh, well, you've got to walking on eggshells almost because they're so scared that a driver will leave because they're so short right now. And yet what you're saying is absolutely true, that that kind of culture that you set, if you don't address problems and have difficult conversations, can actually have the opposite effect, and good people end up walking. So
and it is tough. I absolutely recognize that. You've got to meet your contracts, to get your drivers out, but sometimes it might need some short-term pain for long-term gain.
For sure. Yeah. So in addition to, being fearful that the conversation won't go well, maybe not having the skills to have these conversations, I think there's another interesting dynamic where we see the people at work as our friends, and we want to believe that everyone shows up to do the right thing. But I know that particularly if you've been promoted through the ranks, some managers are hesitant to have those conversations because they still see that other person as their peer. So we're going to talk in more detail today about what to do, how to have those conversations, draw on a bit of experience, and maybe share some examples. Well, Jenny, what do you want to start us off? What would be maybe your recommended approach for someone they're going, okay, right, I've got to go have a difficult conversation. What would be the first thing that you would recommend that they do?
So I'll take it even back a bit to think of different scenarios. Okay, and the principles, yes, Kelly, always stay the same. But let's imagine, because I've had this exact scenario happen. Okay, we know the policies, the SOPs, for example, for driving your forklift. Okay, so we know that. And for a fact that the driver of the forklift knows those. Now, this is an exact scenario. And that driver is not following them. So if I was the leader in that space, I would go up to the driver, and in the scenario, if I can do it, if it's something I can nip that much in the bud, they're not wearing the PPE, they're loading something incorrectly, or whatever where they're not following the SOP, I'd go up to the driver and I'd be saying to the person, hi, mate, I see you're not wearing your seatbelt or you're not wearing your PPE. What can you tell me about that? What do you know about that? So the first is to check their understanding or their knowledge, because legitimately it means the thing that they're not doing may not have been covered off in the induction, or they may have not been at the meeting when they were shared, or they might have been on holiday. So I don't want to make any assumption, and I don't want to come down hard on them.
Or potentially English not as a first language, as another example.
And at that point, I'm going to really stress to ask the open question. So it's not, do you know what you're supposed to do with the forklift? So the guy's going to go, yes, I don't know any different. I'm unaware. My question there is, can you tell me, please, the procedures around driving the forklift? Or can you tell me, about wearing seatbelts on the forklift or something? Whatever you see the infraction is, or you're concerned about, and then that person then affirms that they know that. And then you go, well, and why? The next question I'm saying is, do you know why we have that rule? And so, because adults always need to know why. Adults want to know why. Why am I doing something? And then you're drawing that out of them, still real low key. We're not raising our voice. And the person then tells you, and then say, hey, look, mate. And depending on the age, because now, let's say, hey, look, mate, as an example for the business and for the other people, please, and it is a compliance. It's not something for me. It's, it's legal. It's a compliance. Please, can you put on your PPE or put on the seatbelt or whatever? And I don't leave until that person has. I don't leave until that person has. And then I move on. So there's sort of that little incident where you can actually nip it there and then in the bud as it's happened. What I do,
just a couple of things, Jenny, to pull out, which I really like that you said there. The first is the fact that you were listening, that you were asking a question and giving the other person an opportunity, but then actually actively listening to the answer. I think that's a really important skill. The second thing was that you said was about the non-judgmental kind of neutral tone that you go in. Particularly if it's a conversation you've been putting off. What I have observed is some people kind of can go in there quite worked up because they've had to kind of go, right, I'm going to have this conversation, and get all tense, and that can come across in the tone. So I liked what you said there about keep the tone neutral, keep it relaxed, but going to the point. I think that was a really good point as well.
And what I didn't, if the answer was they didn't know, right, then it's an opportunity to book them in for training or to redo, depending on what it is, relook at some of the induction, because there isn't an opportunity to go, oh, I didn't realize you didn't know. Okay. And particularly, as you say, if it's overseas staff, because health and safety overseas is quite different from health and safety here, especially, from Africa or the islands or something like that. So it's, oh, mate, you didn't know. Well, I need you to wear your seatbelt, and then book that person in for, the little quick workshop or some quick updated induction training on that SOP. Mm-hmm. So that's what you legitimately going in to inquire. What I then do, I make a record for myself, either hard copy. Some people might do it on their phone, because what I am then doing is recording how frequently for the same thing I'm calling that person on. That HR is going to love you, because HR says, you want us to back you, you want us to help you with people who don't follow rules and regulations. Well, we can't without evidence. So I make a note of the date, I make a note of the conversation, and that it might ever be. As a little sidestep, Kelly, what I've also always done when I've had businesses and reports is, because health and safety is pretty much always feels negative, or feel like you're having more negative conversations. And for me, with my English background, with stiff upper lip and everybody should know their job, I make it a conscious effort to not only point out when they're not doing stuff, but it also helps me in my psyche when I see somebody following the rules to actually make a comment saying, hey mate, so pleased to see you wearing your seatbelt, or whatever they're doing. And I make it genuine, because people can pick up, particularly Kiwis, if it's not genuine. Kiwis are not like the Americans, like, oh, good job, mate, or whatever. So I like to try and keep it very genuine, right? But there's, for every time that I call somebody up and have a tough talk, I actively, because of who I am, look out to point out people that are doing it wrong. I mean, doing it right.
And just one caution there. We're not advocating for the the very old-fashioned way of giving feedback, right? Which is tell them something good, then seize on a negative, then tell them something. I think we used to call it a
sandwich.
A sandwich. That's definitely not what we're advocating for, because you end up leaving people going, "Well, what's that about?" And the point is missed, right? So yes. I totally hear you, but just to clarify, when it's a tough conversation, stick to the point. Don't blur it. Be concise. Be clear on what you're asking. The point you're trying to get across. Don't muddy the waters with a whole bunch of other stuff.
And what I was just saying, the opportunity to point out the behavior you want repeated is on a completely different time, a completely different scenario, right? Yeah. So that's nipping the small stuff in the bud. And if you nip that small stuff in the bud, it doesn't grow and grow and grow and become our culture and the way we do things. And if people get away with the small stuff, I promise you, they start pushing the envelope and trying to get away with the bigger stuff. Okay.
One of the things you didn't mention there, but I do see a lot, and particularly with Kiwis, is using humor. Making a joke about things can come across as very sarcastic and a bit condescending. So probably just a call out as well to be a little bit cautious when you're using humor for things like that, because you don't want to set that tone. One of the other tips, Jenny, I heard, I'm not sure if you advise people on this, is hey, look, I'm sure you're aware of the procedures, but I'm just going to go through this with you again, because it's a little bit less you don't want to be telling people to suck eggs, right? When they do know things, but you do need to correct it and make sure that they're very clear on, whatever it is that they're missing out, not getting right.
And also yes, stick to the facts. Also with respect to what you said about humor, the more diverse populations, groups that we have within the business, humor doesn't mean the same to everyone, right? They don't get it. Yeah. So, and also different ages and the whole lot. So yes, stick away from the humor, stay to the facts, and be aware that when you ask somebody to put their seatbelt, follow procedure in that, they'll come up with a reason. Oh, I forgot, or I'm too busy. And I'll be going, we still need to follow this. Yeah. This is.
So what about when it's not a little thing, it's not a nip it in the bud, it's something a little bit bigger. It might be recurrent not wearing the seatbelt, or recurrently smoking in the cab, or whatever it might be, a sit down conversation. Where's the best place to start for something like that?
Well, first up, be wary of hearsay. So you've got to get your facts, and it's got to be absolutely objective when you call that person in. So make sure you have your facts. I remember being employed by this boss owner once, and man, when he called me in, there was no wriggling. There was no wriggle room. He had all the facts and the evidence. So first up, have your facts. It's either a photo taken of somebody, or just have your facts, dates, and the evidence. If a form's been filled in improperly, just have the evidence. I would say, do your homework. Secondly, it would be to call somebody into a private place. Certainly wouldn't be doing it in an open floor in front of others. I'd call them. How you call them in is also important. It's not, I don't want them to come in already feeling defensive, already, building barriers. So, real low key, and also be wary, because I have been as well. I've been on the job working with clients, and a boss has said, oh, I want to see you this afternoon. Well, it puts me off what I'm doing for the client, right? So also think about when you ask that person to come in, because it could distract them from what they're doing. Worst of all, distract them from driving.
I was just thinking about drivers then, actually, because it isn't always possible to get face-to-face conversations with drivers, but being conscious of when are they driving, when are they likely to have a break, or even texting. Some companies have a texting policy where they just send a text and say, when you have your next break, can you please give me a call? But yeah, being cognizant of where someone is, not distracting them from the driving task. And that's a topic we covered a couple of months back about distraction and driver distraction, just being cognizant of that mental distraction. A difficult conversation takes someone's energy, right? It's not appropriate to do it when someone is driving, and you might actually impact their driving performance or their safety.
So when you've taken those things into consideration, and you get that time finally when you are face to face, be it over your media or actually in a room together, what we really need to understand is that person has been dealing with everyday functions and tasks. They haven't necessarily a clue of what you're going to talk about. So the first point is to say, hey, mate, I'm here to talk about this. Let's just, this is what's happened. This is what's occurred. Like you haven't done your vehicle pre-checks or whatever it is. I want to talk about this. You haven't been completing this documentation, the trucks in such a way, or it could be somebody in the administrative part of the business that hasn't been following their procedure. So this is what we're here to talk about today. And can you just share with me? And so you just start having the conversation, set the scene, basically. Okay. Be aware that people, as much as we don't want conflict, we can also be really defensive. So this is where the more objective you are, the more facts and figures that you have, the more evidence you have, just sit back quietly and let them try and be all defensive, and then pull them back to the facts, the figures, the evidence. Because we're all, and say, look, I'm here because we need to get this right. Now, they often don't know, we don't know the implication of what's going to happen because we're not following procedure. So once we've set the scene and they understand, I say, as a result of you not following this procedure, I could get a fine, or this has cost the business X, or people, when we're working in the organization, we don't always understand how one of our actions can impact others in the business and also the cost to the business. So,
I think, Jenny, just to interrupt for a sec, where you said about the implications, or sorry, the why they have to follow the rule or the procedure. I think it's important to be really clear on, this is what's expected. This is what we do around here. This is the rules. You know, not namby-pambying around, oh, you know, come on, mate, you should do that. Oh, well, I know we don't sometimes. And just being really clear on this is what's expected. This is the way we do things here.
Absolutely, Kelly. And as part of your evidence that you take in, you're taking in any legal compliance laws and their contracts. You know, if they're coming to work late, you've got their contracts. You're signed to come in at this time. Yeah. If you know, if the agreement is that they keep their trucks clean or whatever it is, you've got the contract, the legal. It's all part of the evidence that you take in.
And if someone does get all, you know, defensive, like you said, and worked up and emotive and angry, and, you know, tensions start to, voices are raising, or, you know, whatever, what might be a strategy to cope with that?
Well, definitely take a break and say, look, let's continue this conversation tomorrow, or even, you know, in half an hour. And it might even be that you have to bring in support parties or mediators if it gets really bad. And also sometimes, Kelly, even before I go in to have the conversations, depending on the conversations, I'll easily recognize I'm maybe not the best one to have that. And there'll be somebody else in the business who's better at having it, right? Because we just want the outcome. So as a leader, I might think one of the other leaders it could have that conversation better than me, or, you know. Yeah. So if it's the first time, yes, or regardless, first time, whatever, but you're going to have your facts, you're going to have your evidence, be it the contracts, the legal, the health and safety law, whatever it is, you're going to have all of that there in front. We're going to discuss the scenario, remembering the person walking in isn't across it like you. So they need to get them into the same headspace on the same proverbial page, right? And then just work through, well, what was expected, what happened, what was the consequence or potential consequence of what can happen. And then we go on to, okay, what do we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen again? And it could be training, it could be additional support. What do we need to do? And then we're gonna, once we've got that down, we're gonna follow that up to check, are they doing it? Have they had the training? Have they had the support? And date when that follow-up is going to be.
We're kind of coming to the end of our 30 minutes, Jenny. So I think, thank you very much for those suggestions. I think that was fantastic. Probably it's worth summarizing a couple of the basics that we didn't cover, but are assumed, things like keeping your own tone and voice calm and quiet, you know, observing body language, giving the other person an opportunity to respond, actively listening, so that you're really listening to understand what it is that they're saying or what their side of things is. You know, all those really good communication skills that you and I talk about frequently, but perhaps haven't mentioned in this conversation.
I think the biggest thing on both sides, Kelly, to your point then, is assumption. We so often go into having these conversations and we've made assumptions. And if we do everything you've just said, like stay open, stay curious, genuinely want to find out, you'll be surprised how often assumptions that we've made come to the fore.
No, that's excellent. Thank you very much. So look, just to sum up, tough talks, it's a necessary part of working well. As we said before, you know, it's often important in creating a high-performing work culture and a safe work culture as well, and also can lead to, you know, better employee engagement and an all-round better atmosphere, because things get addressed quickly. You know, people know that you and them, they are accountable, and that leads to good safety outcomes, you know, good teamwork, all of those important outcomes.
Nip them in the bud, Kelly, nip them in the bud, don't leave them, right?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jenny, for being a guest today, and thank you to all the participants on the call. the next topic we're tackling at the end of August is incentive schemes and how to introduce incentive schemes. So look out for that next topic, and hope to see everyone on that call as well. Thank you very much for coming along today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.